No problem. Could
Okay,
you
well,
try?
oh,
I undocked my laptop, so I do not have multiple screens. Hopefully, my PowerPoint will work.
if
If
it
you give
doesn't,
me,
yeah, that's fine. And if it doesn't, we will just, I mean, I can flip through it for you because I saved it in my email.
great.
Okay, so welcome everybody to December's webinar on trauma-informed care. Today presenting, we have Kirsty Mounsey from the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center, and she's going to be, I'm going to have make her the presenter here, and hopefully this will work. So momentarily, oh, I see.
You can see my screen.
I can see your screen.
All right, let me do one skip to see if we can advance.
I got your skip.
Fantastic.
There we go. All right, great.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me present on trauma-informed care today. Again, my name is Kirsty Mounsey. I'm the Chief Program Officer here at Cleveland Rape Crisis Center. I've been with the organization for almost 12 years and talking about trauma-informed care and helping other organizations learn about trauma and how they can help clients who potentially are survivors of trauma is really a passion of mine. So I'm very excited to be able to present this to you today. We have a couple objectives for this afternoon. One is we want to learn a little bit about the foundation of trauma-informed care, what it's all about, why we kind of focus on trauma-informed care. We hope that you walk away by being able to articulate why this is important and why this is relevant to your work. I hope that you will learn one or two new ways to be sensitive to trauma in your own work with your callers, with your clients. And hopefully you can also walk out of the webinar by identifying some ways to utilize self-care. Because when we're impacted or when we're in touch with traumatized clients a lot, that trauma often really rubs off on our own emotions, our own psychological and physical well-being. So we want to be mindful of how we feel and how we can help ourselves to stay healthy. So again, the topic today will be all about trauma-informed care and how to implement the principles of trauma-informed care in our work. The idea of trauma-informed care, this model of trauma-informed care, has been around for about a decade now, and it really has come from the understanding and deep-rooted knowledge of how impactful trauma is to an individual. We know today that when a traumatic event happens to an individual, it can truly, truly, truly impact that individual on so many levels for years and years to come. Sometimes can impact their entire life, how they feel about themselves, how they feel about their environment, and how healthy or unhealthy they are, both psychologically and physically. So we believe it's truly important that we understand how trauma manifests, how it impacts people, and then taking that knowledge of the impact of trauma and apply it to our day-to-day work. Just a very brief overview of the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center. We are a comprehensive agency that provides services to survivors of rape and sexual abuse in Northeast Ohio. We have several locations that we provide services from. We have a location in downtown Cleveland, right across from you in the Halley building. But we also have offices in Beechwood, in Westlake, in Ashtabula, Lake County.
Are you on this webinar? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem. In Lake County and Ashtabula County, where primarily we provide counseling and therapeutic services in our offices to anyone who has ever been assaulted at any point in their life. Many of our clients at CRCC are folks who have suffered from their trauma for years and years and years to come. Often that trauma is 5, 10, 15 years in the past, and they're still struggling with the ramifications. And so many of our clients tell us that they've been in therapy and have done other treatments, but that they gotten to the point where they really feel that this idea of really tackling the trauma and doing trauma therapy is very appealing to them, and that's often how they come to us. We also provide 24-hour services. We have a hotline, chat and text line that folks can access 24/7. And we also have a hospital response 24/7. So if a survivor goes to an emergency room for a sexual assault kit, we dispatch an advocate so that that survivor can have emotional support and access to ongoing services. We further have a criminal justice system advocacy. So if a survivor decides they want to press charges against the perpetrator, we have advocates who support that survivor every step of the way. And we do lots of other things like prevention, trainings, and community education to inform the community about our work and the impact of trauma in general. I want to mention that our services are free of charge, so insurance, lack thereof is never a barrier for services. So as you refer to us, please keep that in mind, that although we do charge insurance companies, if someone does not have insurance, we do not charge them for the service. So let's talk a little bit about the prevalence of sexual violence, because sexual violence truly is one of those traumas that is quite prevalent and can really impact people in really devastating ways. So I just kind of want to highlight on this slide that sexual violence is truly an epidemic in our world, in our country, in our community. I think there's issues in the media right now, and we really are hearing about it all the time. But these numbers truly reflect what research, national research says, which is 1 out of 5 and 1 out of 71 men has been the victim of this crime in their lifetime. When we take a step back and look at folks who've been experiencing other forms of sexual violence, then the numbers increase even more. So any experience of unwanted sexual contact, sexual harassment, and coercion, we see that 1 out of 2 women and 1 out of 5 men will be the survivor, the victim of this. Unfortunately, young children and young adults are disproportionately affected. Nearly 70% of sexual abuse happens for folks who are under the age of 17. And unfortunately, what makes it really difficult with this crime and its reporting rate is that 76% of sexual assaults are perpetrated by someone the victim knows, loves, and trusts. So that often makes it very, very difficult for people to speak out in the moment when this happened to them. This also leads to sexual assault being the most underreported crime in our nations. 63% are never reported to the police, and unfortunately only a very small percent of perpetrators are ever reprimanded for what they have done. So with these statistics, knowing that this happens to a lot of people in our world, and knowing that a lot of victims, survivors do not disclose right after it happens, do not seek help after the trauma occurs. We know that many of them suffer in silence for a long time, and we may not be in contact with them, and they may not disclose to us until years and years down the road. We know that women, for example, with histories of abuse have much higher levels of mental health care use, have somatic and stress-related illnesses, often suffer from chronic pain, depression. Many of our clients and many survivors of sexual violence struggle with substance abuse disorders. And unfortunately, a proportionate amount of folks are also involved in the criminal justice system. So you can kind of see that people who have been traumatized in this way and then develop mental health, physical health issues or substance abuse issues, or are in touch with the criminal justice system, are often the folks that then reach out to you because they need resources, and often reach out to other organizations who provide them with basic daily living things, so they can maintain their life. So we know that a lot of the folks we interact with, you interact with, and other hotlines interact with as well. So we also want to really focus a little bit more on the victim's experience. We know that a lot of our survivors truly struggle with the range of emotions that they're confronted with all the time. These emotions often make it difficult, again, to talk about this or to report it. It is often delayed, as I said. Any disclosure often is delayed, and we have to have empathy that, you know, they're just not in a place to disclose this violence right away. And very often victims may struggle to remember details of the assault, which also makes it really difficult sometimes to piece together the whole story that, that they have experienced. The other thing that I think we need to really pay attention to when we have folks who have experienced this kind of trauma is that they're tremendously struggling with guilt, shame, embarrassment, that they distrust the system. Many of our clients have been failed by Child and Family Services and other systems and are now not trusting anymore. This crime, as I said, is mostly committed by people that the victim loves, knows, and trusts. And so when trust is broken between people that are supposed to take care of us and that are supposed to be the people closest to us, it makes it really difficult then to trust other people and not be distrusting of really anyone we're in contact with. Of course, sources of traumatic stress can be other things besides sexual violence. So, of course, there are many things that can happen to us as human beings that could create this form of traumatic stress. So losing someone we love, getting in an accident, suddenly becoming homeless, being witness to community school violence, domestic violence, neglect, all of these things on the slide can be things that create these traumatic reactions. And I believe that statistics say that between 75 and 85% of the general population in the United States has had an experience that we would consider traumatic. So that's a lot of people who potentially have something in their history that they would consider traumatic. So let's slow down for a quick second and look at what trauma really is and why it is so important to pay attention to it. So trauma, of course, is an event or a series of events. In many cases, trauma continues in dysfunctional households, abusive households. Trauma is not a single kind of thing. It happens daily, weekly, monthly, and people are susceptible to it on a regular basis. So we can talk about it in either ways. But what's in common is that these events are encased in an overwhelming amount of fear and terror. So trauma is always attached to fear of losing someone's life, fear of getting hurt, fear of someone else dying or getting hurt in the moment this trauma happens. And what really makes it traumatic is that these moments where this, the violence occurs, the person who experiences it really experiences it as an unmanageable event in the moment. So our ability to cope with what is happening is completely overwhelmed. In fact, what we know today from the trauma of the brain is that our brain utilizes a very basic survival mechanism when we are faced with so much fear and terror. It's meant to be helpful. So think about it many hundreds of years ago when people were threatened by animals in the wilderness, and they needed to run really fast and they needed to fight back. This fight or flight mechanism was really. Oh, was really, really helpful. So really what happened in this moment, that our rational part of the brain shuts down and the fear center of the brain takes over, and we don't really think about what we're doing. We don't really rationalize what we're doing. We just react, which is often is, of course, fight or flight. I'm sure you all have heard of that before. Unfortunately, what happens when this mechanism is activated once, our body kind of remembers how to utilize it, and we'll continue to utilize it when we are faced with similar fear and terror incidents. So going forward, often the behavior of survivors is organized around managing this intense fear and loss. So traumatic events are extraordinary, not because they occur rarely, but rather because they overwhelm the ordinary human adaptation to life. So here is just a picture. You can see how different a healthy brain looks from an abused brain, that there are parts of the brain, if you look at the right brain, is really shut down. It's there's not normal brain activity going on, and that absolutely impacts our functioning, our thoughts, our cognition, and our capacity to just do day-to-day life. The other thing that we need to know is that after traumatic experience, the brain really retains and remembers even the smallest detail of the experience. And again, this is a survival skill that we have, that we don't have any control over, but it really helps us to remember this traumatic experience by the smell, by the sight, by any other senses. So if we're ever faced with this again, we can react quickly and we can escape and survive. Unfortunately, these triggers, as we call them, again, they are sight, smell, taste, sounds, feelings, can really trigger a survivor into past traumas. It can feel as if the trauma is happening all over again, and the survivor may or may not respond as if the danger was there. So they may go into a flight mode, they may run away, or they may get into a fight mode. They may get angry, they may get aggravated, and we may not recognize it in the moment on the phone or in an office setting, but something about that is going on, and again, sight, smell, taste, feeling, sound, something that the other person said may have triggered this survivor into a traumatic experience from the past. And survivors will say to us all the time that these triggering situations, when they're confronted with past trauma, that it truly feels like this experience is happening to them again. So the pain feels the same, the memories come back really strongly, and it's really intrusive. So what we also know about trauma is that a lot of things can occur that are trauma related, that we may not necessarily piece the puzzle together regularly, but I do kind of want to show you the depth and breadth of the impact of trauma here on this slide. And I think you will see some of the stuff that you hear from your clients on a regular basis that they're struggling with. So very often when someone is impacted by trauma, and this trauma is not resolved, it has not been treated, and they're living with it for a really long time, often a way of coping, a way of surviving, is to really drown out the negative feelings with alcohol, drugs, food, gambling, other mechanism that let us forget for a while that we're really struggling from this traumatic incident. We see that some clients self-injure, that some clients are aggressive and they hurt others, that they, again, the shame, guilt, and fear is something that we hear a lot. The disruption of basic needs is something that I'm sure you encounter on a regular basis. We had a client once who was assaulted in her own home and couldn't stay in her house. She was so re-triggered and so had such traumatic re-experiencing and so depressed and anxious in her own home that she needed to move, and she didn't have the means to do that. So we had to put a lot of things in place for her to get back on her feet and to start her life over in a different place. So I can very well see that you could interact with someone like that who had their basic needs completely disrupted. So lots and lots of different things. I'm not going to go over all of them, but all of what you see here on the slide potentially could be connected to experience of trauma in the past. I also want to introduce you very briefly to a study that has really helped us in the trauma world to talk about the impact of trauma, and the study has really shaped our trauma-informed care movement, so to speak. This study, the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, has been created by Kaiser Permanente and the Center for Disease Control. It's a longitudinal study, and thousands of people have participated in the study to really give us a better understanding of how early childhood experiences, adverse childhood experience, so we're talking about neglect, sexual abuse, physical abuse, all these things could impact a human being going forward into their life. When they have found a significant correlation between early childhood experiences and high-risk behaviors, disease, disability, and social problems, as well as emotional, social, and cognitive impairments. So they really have found that when these experiences happen early in childhood, they truly disrupt the brain development, the body development, they disrupt the neurodevelopment of young children, and that then leads to social and emotional and cognitive impairments, which then often, as a way to survive, as a way to cope, leads to high-risk behaviors. And we all know that high-risk behaviors, such as using drugs and alcohol to an abusive degree, can easily lead to disease, social problems, and disabilities. Unfortunately, an early death has also been associated with this. So it's a really impactful study that has really helped us talk about the effect of trauma on individuals, and really has helped us to advocate for trauma-informed care. So here we are, speaking about trauma-informed care and what does it mean, and why do we need to talk so much about what trauma is and how trauma impacts an individual to get to the point that we really emphasize this model. So trauma-informed care has really been widely adopted by non-trauma providing agencies. So many substance abuse treatment agencies, mental health agencies, and other social service agencies have gotten on board with this approach and have really identified that, wow, yes, so many of our consumers, so many of the people that interact with us on a regular basis are truly impacted by trauma. So this trauma-informed care approach is defined as a strength-based delivery approach that is grounded in an understanding of and responsiveness to the impact of trauma, that emphasizes physical, psychological, and emotional safety for both providers and survivors. So what trauma-informed care really wants to do is remove as many triggers from our consumers' environment, from our own environment. So when consumers interact with us, they are not taken back into their traumatic experience. They're not having symptoms just by interacting with us. They're not having, they're not confronted with sights and sounds and smells that potentially can be very harmful to them. So it's really a system that hopes to instill control and empowerment to our clients and our consumers, so they remain engaged in our systems and heal from what they're experiencing. The other shift that trauma-informed care makes or seeks to do is instead of asking what is wrong with people, instead of asking people why are you in this place, why has this happened to you, what did you do to get here, it's really about asking what is happening to you or what happened to you. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Oh yeah, I can hear you fine.
I had a box pop up that said I may experience network connection, so I want to make sure. So when we are a trauma-informed care organization or program or system, many of the statewide systems have taken this on board, the Adams Board, the DCFS, all of those bigger systems are trying to find a way to employ trauma-informed care within their organization. You can imagine that that's really challenging since they're so big and there's so many ways to challenge a system like that. But it is truly something that most folks in the mental health and substance abuse and social service community are trying to fit into their models and fit into their service delivery. So I think number one and the most important thing, and what we just did, although I did this very briefly with you, is just to really realize that trauma is widespread and that trauma has a huge impact on whoever experiences it. So this trauma could be a potential real hurdle for people's recovery. And if we don't recognize that trauma, if we don't realize and understand it, we may unintentionally harm our clients and push them away from our service delivery system. So this trauma-informed care model also recognizes the signs and symptoms of trauma. So we understand that signs and symptoms can vary. They can be big symptoms, they can be small symptoms, they can be psychological, but they can be also economical. So lots and lots of different things that can happen when someone is affected by it. We also recognize that trauma can affect our own families, our staff within our organizations, and others who are involved in our system. Trauma-informed care agencies respond to this knowledge by fully integrating what they know, what they've learned about trauma into the policies, procedures, and practices. So this is not just something that we do training about and, I might do something different the next time I answer a call or meet with a client. But the idea of this trauma-informed care system is that it truly trickles down to all levels of the organization, that people in administration are informed about it, that policies are based on it, that our strategic planning and other procedures and practices are really in line with what we know about trauma. Whoops. So some of the things that we could ask ourselves in becoming one of these trauma-informed care systems is really digging down on what does trauma mean to us? How does it affect the people that we're working with? How can we really learn from the folks that come to us? So really listening to the voices of our consumers and learning from them about what comfort they may have to disclose their trauma to us, and what we learn from them about how this trauma manifests and how they're managing it. We want to, of course, kind of do some work in our organization around why an understanding of trauma is important to our work we do. And of course, what can we do to ensure that those we help and serve don't get re-traumatized. So again, here's just a slide about the shift that I talked about. I think very often in the past, helping systems have taken on this traditional approach of looking at clients from a deficit lens, where we look at clients as sick, we look at clients as bad, we look at clients who are unmotivated, we labeled them as delinquents and unmotivated, and really used words that almost blamed the client for the situation they're in. Where trauma theory and the trauma theory approach here that we're using kind of tries to flip that and is really not focusing on sick or bad, but really focuses on the fact that folks who have been traumatized are truly injured. They have sustained a psychological injury. Remember back at that slide with the two sides of the brain. This trauma has truly, truly altered how their brain is functioning. And if they never got help for that, if they never got treatment for that, that injury is still there and will impact them in some way or another for the rest of their lives. So here are some of the key principles that trauma-informed care utilizes to help put all of this into practice. So one of the most important, hence it's on the top of the list, one of the most important principles in this approach is safety. You can imagine from what I talked about, trauma is always connected to fear. It's always connected to terror. It's always connected to someone feeling like their life and livelihood is threatened. So the antidote to feeling that way, to feeling threatened, to feeling like someone is going to harm me, is really safety. So creating safety for our clients, which we can do in various ways, helps really reset that and helps people feel like they're not going to be re-traumatized when they're connected to us. So we can really look at safety from various angles. It can be physical safety, so looking at our spaces, looking at where clients interact with us. Are these spaces that seem safe? Are those spaces dark? Are they not well lit? Is the elevator not working? Are doors locked? Could someone just walk into a space and feel really scared just by what they're seeing? So environmental safety is very important. But of course, emotional and psychological safety is really important too. So the way we talk to our clients, the way we approach them, the tone of voice that we're using, if we get defensive, if we get accusatory, that can feel really, really unsafe for our clients. So really checking ourselves on how we talk, how we connect, can really lead to a lot of safety right away in a helping relationship. The next one is trustworthiness and transparency. Of course, we want to be seen as a trustworthy and transparent organization, and there's a lot of things we can do to get there. We can be very clear about what we can provide. We can be very clear about what we can't provide. We can, give our clients all the choices that they have available to them. So it's really about being open, being willing to share and give information to our callers and the clients that come to our organizations. The third principle is peer support. Trauma-informed care believes that it is important that consumers, survivors, have the opportunity to connect with others who have experienced very similar situations. There is an exchange that happens between people who connect over trauma that is never the same in a therapeutic relationship. So creating these spaces, helping connect trauma survivors to other peer supports, which we have such wonderful ones around town. We have Cleveland Crisis Center, we have peer support. NAMI does a lot of that. AA, NA, those are all support systems where people may find a home and may feel really good to be connected to others. 4 is collaboration and mutuality. So the idea of that is really us as service providers, us as helpers, not telling clients what to do, not pushing our own opinion on someone, not being parentalified, not acting in the role of mother or father, but to really be a supportive helper. To, again, give the client, the caller, all the options that they have, but to be okay if they choose something different or not take advantage of all the opportunities altogether. That collaboration leads to a lot of empowerment. Trauma survivors, if you think about it, their choice, their voice has been taken away. They never chose to be traumatized. They never chose to be hurt or abused. This is something someone else or something forced on them. So our job as trauma-informed helpers is really to give it back to them and to help them make the best possible choices, help them understand that they have the power to even, make choices in their lives. Many of them don't even know how to do that anymore. And then, of course, coming, right in line with this collaborative approach, this empowerment approach, we also want to pay attention to cultural, historical, and gender issues. That really goes back to the idea that there are cultures and parts of the folks that live in our city, in our communities, are oppressed by virtue of culture and gender, and that they may feel even more powerless and voiceless than others. So here again, this goes over these core principles that I just talked about. So really utilizing, in the first one, utilizing our caller strength and really empowering them in the development of their treatment, of their life, of the choices that they make. It's this change in lens on, instead of looking at a caller or a client as someone who has deficits, to really looking at what are their strengths and how can I build on those strengths. I know that's really hard sometimes, especially when people have so much going on in their lives and they have what we perceive so many problems and nothing seems to be working out for them. When we have callers and clients like that, it's especially important to really slow down and help them identify, hey, what are you doing really well? How can we start there? Instead of looking at all the stuff that you think you can't do or it's not working, let's start with the strength. Let's start with something you have energy for, something you like to do, and go from there. Going back to choice, we want to really do a good job in this trauma-informed care approach to inform our consumers, client, patients regarding their options. I think you're a place that is really, really valuable in doing that. You give people a lot of choices and options. From then they can pick and really use that empowerment and take it further into whatever they need. Maximizing collaboration amongst healthcare staff, patients, and their families is also very important. So who can we connect to the call of the client? Who is there? Who's supportive to them? And how can we make sure that they're part of this multidisciplinary team that is connected to the person? We talked about safety, and just one, trustworthiness again shows up here, where it's really, again, about clear expectations, clear boundaries, clear and honest account of what we can and what we cannot do. So here's just a nice graphic again to kind of bring it all together, bring it all on one page on how this trauma-informed care circle works. It's really, I love this this graphic so much because it's really wrapping around this trauma-informed care circle, and it really is the idea that when we wrap this around our callers, our clients, the people that take advantage of our services, they have something really special, and it hopefully lifts them to where they need to go, and of course, most importantly, does not re-traumatize them. I do want to say a word. I think this all sounds really fantastic, and I think we all agree that we don't want to re-traumatize anyone, willingly. I think, we all agree on that, and this is why we're all in helping professions. But we also kind of just want to acknowledge that sometimes the responses that are based in traumatic experiences can be very challenging for service providers and are often misunderstood and are interpreted in negative ways. So what am I talking about here is that some of our client characteristics can be, again, very challenging for us to receive. Sometimes folks who have been severely traumatized have a very brisk interpersonal style, or may struggle with interpersonal relationships in general. They may not really know how to communicate in a compassionate manner. You may really pick up on their untrustworthiness. They may be aggressive. They may be angry at you. And sometimes we take that very personal, and we don't really want to work with that person because they yell at us and they put all their anger on us. All the stuff that ever happened to them kind of gets put out there on the phone lines. So this trauma-informed care approach really, again, makes us slow down and say, okay, where's this anger coming from? Is this anger really about me? Is this anger really about the service that they can't get? Or is this anger really about all the hurt they have experienced? And it really has nothing to do with me. So we kind of want to do that paradigm shift, and maybe you can check on it next time when you interact with a caller that has a difficult interpersonal style and that does put a lot of their stuff on you. To really slow down a moment and say, hey, maybe this is someone who's really been hurt, and maybe I'm a safe place where they can put all that stuff out. So again, often what we get from callers or clients that are traumatized is an oversensitivity and an irritability that can be very hard to receive. That can be really off-putting sometimes to us, and we wonder why this client is reacting in such a way. To us, it may seem oversensitive and irritable, but underneath it all, there may be an exaggerated startle response. This client may be on guard much of the time because they're always fearing for their safety. They may not be sleeping. They may be experiencing insomnia. So they're just constantly tired, and this tiredness has just really worn them down. They may have difficulty concentrating, and of course, hopefully we don't see that a lot, but this trauma and this oversensitivity and irritability just comes from a deep rooted sense of anger. So what we really, kind of to summarize what we just talked about, where we need to come from is a general understanding that we don't know what kinds of experience our clients have had in the past. And what we want to do is, because we don't know that, and we often will never know if there is a trauma in their past, we want to kind of provide this trauma-informed care approach in a universally sensitive manner. So no matter who calls, no matter how they respond to us, we want to be sensitive and keep back in the back of our minds that potentially they may be survivors of trauma. So if we assume that their presenting problems are not related to trauma, then we truly, truly miss a great opportunity to help. We may shut them down, we may get offended, we may get defensive, and we're not effective in our relationship, in the communication, in the call, in the session, whatever service we provide. If we do assume that trauma may be playing a role, then we begin to pay attention to the signs of trauma and hopefully ask the right questions to get the client where they're at. Also by not being defensive, not being offended by some of those behaviors that our clients present with, we really open the door to create trust and safety for the client and for our organization as a whole. So using a trauma-informed approach, to summarize kind of what we talked about, we developed a top 10 list. I'm not going to go over all top 10 because some of them are very much developed for clinicians, but I want to share some of those highlights with you of things that you hopefully are taking away today and that might be helpful for you going forward. So one, you have learned about adverse childhood experiences. You have learned how early childhood trauma may affect an individual and really may change someone and impact them negatively throughout their entire life. So knowing this research, knowing that this is truly something that is built on longitudinal information and research can often help us kind of say, okay, yeah, this is true information, and you know, I will work with that and I will incorporate that into my work. So here again is just a summary of the bottom line of that. To provide effective services, we truly need to understand the life situations that people face. Many current problems, many of what is happening lead back to traumatic life experiences. People are often very, very sensitive, and anytime they're reminded by the trauma, by either people, places, things, smell, sound, all of these things that we talked about can bring back their traumatic events. And again, as much as we can counteract that by the way we speak, by the way our voice reflects, by us lowering our defenses, feeling attacked, feeling triggered, sometimes ourselves by the client, we can really create that safe place and that healing environment. So knowing also that we might unintentionally cause harm by practice and policies that are insensitive to the needs of our clients. We know today that that can be super re-victimizing and traumatizing, and we may not even be aware. So hopefully this hour-long training will kind of open your eyes, or maybe start thinking about where some of those practices may be happening within your organization, maybe not, and really start the dialogue about where can we be more sensitive and how can we do a different job. So here again, what hurts are any unintentional practices, policies, activities that are insensitive to the needs of our clients. And what really helps are truly interactions that are based and rooted in kindness, in patience, in reassurance, in calm and acceptance and listening. So these basic just human interaction skills that really convey, I'm here, I'm listening, I'm really interested in helping you, I'm not taking whatever you say personal, it's not about me. I understand now that when you're yelling at me, when you're angry, that this is coming from a place of trauma. I think we really can shift our mindset and can really express this kindness, patience, reassurance to even callers who come across as difficult ones. What's really helpful also to bring down kind of the defenses of clients is to use the word please and thank you a lot. You know, to really let client know that you're appreciative of them calling, that you think that their strength that the client even picked up the phone and reached out, that is the first step to getting better, to receiving the services that they deserve. Those kind of things really go a long way. Another thing that we say a lot here at the Rape Crisis Center, especially when people disclose abuse to us on the phone, on the hotline, we really let them know that we're really sorry that this happened to them. And people really respond to, again, this extension of kindness and calm and patience. The next one, that if you want to start doing more work about trauma-informed care and remind yourself on the things that we talked about, there is a lovely self-care wheel out there. It's something that you can print out. You can hang it on your desk to remind yourself what are some of the things you can do for yourself. We talked about earlier that trauma, when we're connected with trauma all the time, we hear a lot of traumatizing stories, that trauma really permeates our own world, our own life. Trauma, we know today, it's not about if, it's about when this trauma impacts us on some level. Either may it be physical, psychological, emotional, personal, spiritual, professional. Most of us will hit a point in our professional lives where we feel really burned out, where we feel really stressed out, and it's just too much. We've just heard too many stories, and you know, we really want to make sure that we have self-care strategies available on a regular basis, practice those, do things that feel good to us, make us happy, get us out of our daily grind. So really thinking about those and having those available can go a very long way. And there's also a wheel for trauma-informed care. So if you want to hang some wheels over your desk and be reminded of all the fun stuff we talked about today, these are printable and give you a really nice visual reminder on how to do this kind of work. So what's also really important when it comes to our approach of trauma-informed care, we really want to be mindful of any victim blaming, because blaming someone for what happened to them can be, again, very much lead to victimization, re-traumatization. So being patient, being aware of our tone, of our body language, can really go a very long way. Trauma survivors respond well to active listening and to things like, I'm really sorry this happened to you. Validating feelings for clients. It totally makes sense that you feel this way. You've gone through a lot. This must be very, very difficult for you. Phrases like that, again, can be really impactful and really connect that client to us in a kind and meaningful way. So we learned today also, number 8, that when we're trauma-informed care practitioners, we know a lot about the neurobiology of the brain. So if this would have been a longer training, you would have heard me go on and on and on about what the brain does and how it's working, and it's quite fascinating on what can happen and how impactful trauma can be on the brain in a negative way, but then also the amazing things that we know today on how to heal trauma and how to change in a positive way what the trauma did to the brain. So it's really amazing. The brain is a very plastic organ, and we can truly do some therapy work that can negate some of the traumatic impact. A word about slowing down. This is also something that's important to know and might be helpful for you as you're on the phone with someone who's disclosing their story, that it's really okay to let the caller know that you and them need to slow down. Sometimes people find it very cathartic to just go on and you know, they have you on the phone and they just think, okay, now I have this person that's listening to me. I'm just going to tell them everything in every detail. But what we know and what you've learned today is that can be really re-traumatizing. So slowing someone down, taking a break, saying, hey, let's take a moment, let's take a deep breath together. I'm wondering what it feels like telling me all of this. And letting the caller know that you're a little worried that when they're telling you all of that, that you know, they may open a Pandora's box that they can't close. So it's okay to slow the client down, the caller down, and to maybe even redirect them if it keeps going on and on and on. There's this metaphor that we love to use when it comes to slowing down or hitting the brakes. And this metaphor really kind of shows what occurs when someone has kind of this emotional overwhelm and they're just compelled to totally, you know, tell you everything about their story. It's kind of the same as a shaken bottle of soda. When we shake that bottle of soda and we take the cap off really fast, all the pressure comes out and all the soda flows out of the bottle. And that's kind of the same with someone who discloses a lot of emotional material all at once. It kind of all comes out. And then just with soda, it's really hard to put it all back in a healthy place. So the best way for us to let this material come out is by really going slow, by checking in with the client, and to be very intentional. And it's always okay to put on the brakes and ask the client to stop in their storytelling. I'm going to skip over that because you're not going to do yoga or meditation. You're also not doing trauma treatment. I do want to quickly say a word, and I stay with our humor. We like to make our work as fun as possible, our PowerPoints here. This goes back to really the empowerment aspect of trauma-informed care, where we really want our clients to be in control. We want the client to be the expert of their experience. We want to give the client the power to control their lives. As I said before, when a trauma occurs, that power is taken away. And the most impactful thing we can do is to restore that power back to the client. So helping our clients in such a way that they understand and recognize that they have that power and that they have control over their lives is really impactful. Let's skip over this. But I'm going to go over this slide, which goes back to our self-care. So I already skipped a kind of tiptoed on that, on how important self-care is. And I believe earlier today, I believe that you will have some training specifically focused on self-care because it is so important. If we go down the slide of vicarious trauma, burnout, stress, we're no longer able to extend really good client care. We're easier to offend. We get angry at clients. We cannot help and make that very kind and compassionate connection if we're not okay and in a good place ourselves. So really taking that on board and making self-care something that's a regular thing within and outside of your agency is a big building block and a big part of what trauma-informed care preaches. So this can be done in very many ways, you know, by time that you have, what do you do with your time, how do you use your time outside of work. All of those things can really help us to be healthy physically and psychologically. So I'm sending you off today with the homework, a little bit of homework to maybe think about what your top 10 self-care strategies are and what you like to do, what gives you energy, what gives you life, what keeps you healthy. And to, if you have a hard time coming up with any, maybe think about what you used to do, or if there's anything that you stopped doing and could start doing again. So lots and lots of ideas and things that potentially could jumpstart your self-care regime, unless you already have one that's really working, and I hope that's true for many of you. Just a quick shout out again, if you're interested in making a referral to Cleveland Rape Crisis Center, I know we're part of your referral network. Here's our intake line again. We can also request appointments online, which is a really nice way for folks who don't want to call, or you don't want to make that first call. They can fill out that request and we get back to them within 24 hours. So that is the end of my presentation for today. I went over a tiny bit, but I'm sure we can take a couple minutes should there be any questions or concerns about what we talked about in the last hour.
Hi, I'm wondering if the presentation is available, the PowerPoint presentation is available for distribution?
Absolutely. I already sent it out earlier, so feel free to use it. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, this is Molly. She did email me a copy of it already. I'm going to get it at some point when I get a hot second uploaded to Degreed, so that anybody has access to review it.
Thank you, Molly.
Okay, yeah. Okay, does anybody else have any other questions?
One quick one, actually.
Yes.
With the biological effects that you found on brains of people who have been affected by trauma, do you find that like some of the actual like emotional connection part of the brain comes back after they have been found to get the actual informed care that they've received as far as services are concerned?
Yes. So what we do in the work with our clients, so what trauma does is really changes the way, as you said, how the brain operates and how the rational and irrational part of the brain connect. And what we're really trying to do is create new brain neural pathways in the brain, so we bypass this fear response. Right, we want to get rid of that fear response. We don't want the brain to go into this, hyper fear thing all the time when there's a trigger. So we want to help the brain understand. I know it sounds a little crazy, but that's really what we're doing. Help the brain understand that not everything is a trigger, and we don't have to have immediate psychological, physiological reactions. So that's really kind of the work that we do. It's
excellent. Thank you.
Lots of it is reversible. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I hope this was helpful to your work, and please keep up the great work at 211 and with Trauma Informed Care.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to give us this knowledge about trauma-informed care. We appreciate your time, Kirsty.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, all right. So now I've got some brief check-ins here. Do you guys see my screen right now?
I do.
Okay.
No, I don't see it.
All right, hold on.
I do not.
Okay.
I can't see it either, Molly.
Okay. All right. You guys see it now?
Yep, now I got it.
Okay. All right. So a few things that I wanted to to point out this month, first, coordinated access. So I spoke with both Nikki and Sandra, and they asked that I just ask everybody to remember to be thorough when you're making a referral to coordinated access. So what I mean by that is you want to record all of your demographics in refer, including the information on the data page before you make the call and complete to Nikki. And also to be sure when you're doing a status check to fill out the form completely until you get to where it says stop here if client is checking status of prior screening, or if they're already working with coordinated access. So just to kind of, oops, I'm trying to pull my refer over here. So just to kind of point this all out, you're filling out all this data in here in refer. Let's see here. You're actually going in and saving the referral for Emergency Shelter Clearinghouse with the appropriate target. So you're actually saving this in refer. You're going to the data page. You're continuing to fill out this contact data, all this stuff over in this far column over here. And then you're fully filling out the pre-screen here. Now, when people are just calling to check the status, or if they are just calling for their HMIS number, you still want to fill out this first portion of the form, and you want to fill it out completely up until you get to this point here where it says stop here. It's really important to get all of this data because this is going to help Nikki and Sandra pull up this person's file, particularly for somebody that has a really common name. So like John Smith, maybe there's like 100 of them in the system. So we do need this identifying information so that they're making sure that they're pulling the right person and calling the right person. So just be careful with that. I also wanted to point out that Mike has done a little bit of tweaking with the Breathe Free taxonomy. So what you'll see in here that's different from before is he's had added targets for smartphone apps, talk lines, warm lines, texts, and web-based discussion groups, live chats, and websites. So that'll just help you to find what you're looking for, we think, a little bit easier. So just, be aware that there have been those changes to help us to better navigate services that we want to pull up. During calibration, we decided that there really needed to be an official scripting for when you're receiving a callback. This is more critical now than ever before because at least for staff that works during the daytime, very few calls that we're receiving these days are actually somebody's calling, it's ringing, they're listening to the IVR and getting connected to you right away. Most of the calls that you're getting at this point are callbacks. So we wanted to have some sort of consistency with the way that we're greeting these callers that we're calling back. So when that happens, you're going to want to say, this is your callback from 211. My name is Molly. How may I help you today? So just take note of that. This is going forward going to be the scripting that you'll need to use for any callbacks. I know there's quite a few new staff on since this time last year, so I just kind of wanted to make you all aware that every year around this time, we will get some test calls from Geauga County. And in the past, this has been students that are making the calls. However, this year it's going to be adult volunteers. And these calls are going to be happening this Friday. We don't know exactly what time it's going to happen, but it'll be at some point during the day on Friday, December 15th. You'll receive a call from Geauga, and essentially what's going to happen is those volunteers are going to have some sort of scenario written out for them, and they're going to let you know what that scenario is, and then you would just navigate the call, ask questions, try to assess as best you can, and provide referrals. Now, please be mindful that generally when they do this, they're going to have you on speakerphone. So you're not just talking to that one person on the end of the phone, but you'll have a whole room full of people that are listening to you. So please be mindful of that when handling these calls. Just one thing to kind of keep in mind is that because these things, they kind of have a script in front of them, when you're asking probing questions, they may be scrambling for some sort of answer to those questions. So, excuse me, sorry, I had to cough. So just kind of be mindful that that they might not be able to answer all of your probing questions immediately. They might be kind of grasping for things. That's because this is just a made-up scenario. But just roll with it, and you know, don't let them know that you know that it's a test call. Just treat it as an actual call. Okay, I sent out an email several weeks ago with some problem gambling updates. So I just kind of wanted to go over those really quickly. Now, the way this came about is that I did a webinar with a few of our contacts through our contract with the state about what happens when people call the problem gambling helpline. And it was a presentation that was catered towards professionals who might be referring their clients on who have issues with gambling. And so Scott Anderson from the state kind of gave me the heads up on these couple of things that are happening. There are now lottery kiosks that are available in some areas. These are essentially a vending machine where you can get lottery tickets. In the past, you would have to purchase your lottery tickets with cash from these machines. Now, in some areas, they're able to accept credit and debit cards. And with those machines, customers have a $100 limit per card per day. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. You may have some callers that are referencing these vending machines. I know that we've already had at least one call from someone who was really, really upset because she accidentally pressed something wrong on the kiosk and ended up with more tickets than what she really wanted. And then she was very upset because she was concerned that her bank account was going to bounce, or actually rather her father's bank account was going to bounce because for some reason she was using her dad's debit card. The whole situation was rather questionable, but at any rate, she was calling and upset and figured that the problem gambling number would help her with any problems that she's having with gambling. So in that sort of circumstance, we just want to make sure that we're explaining that this is a hotline to help people who have an addiction to get help and refer them to the Ohio Lottery customer service. Excuse me, I'm so sorry, I'm so sick. Also the Jack Entertainment is soon going to be adding rooms for computer gamers to play in a group and place wagers on the games. I don't know exactly when this is going to roll out. I don't know what games that are going to be available, just that essentially a separate room in the Jack facilities for computer games and wagering on them. So I don't know if we'll end up with any more information on that, but just wanted to let you know you may have some folks calling later on down the line referencing that. And then some Ohio lottery vendors are already able to print out these kind of fake tickets. However, they're going to roll this out throughout all the vendors in the state so that if a vendor suspects that somebody might have a problem with gambling, that they can discreetly give that person our contact information. So essentially, if a vendor is noticing that a person is coming in, they're spending quite a lot of money, they're there very often, they think it might be a problem for this person, they're going to print out this ticket along with their other tickets and just discreetly hand it to them. And I know that this is not a very clear picture here, but what it says is Gambling Helpline, does playing the lottery no longer seem fun? Help is available. Call, and then it gives our number. And then I just wanted to let you guys know kind of where we're at with staffing. We've got a whole heck of a lot of people in training right now. It's a total of, we've got 6 part-time remotes for navigation services. We've got our MedRefer specialist who is getting towards the tail end of her training. So, stay tuned for more details on the re-rollout of MedRefer. And then also 1 full-time on-site staff person. So help is on the way. We're still, we're not at the tail end of training for any of these folks just yet, other than for the MedRefer program. So we still have some time to work, but I'm thinking everybody should be pretty much in place before we start getting completely crushed with taxes. And speaking of taxes, I just wanted to let you all know that we're going to be doing like a tax refresher training. And then for those of you who are new and have been hired within the last year or less than year since, let's say, since last March, we'll be doing some group trainings for handling tax calls. For those of you on site, we're just going to schedule some time on site in small groups. For those of you off site, there'll be several webinars at varying times of day to make sure that everybody can sit in on that. And this is going to happen over the next several weeks before we start handling those calls. I believe our contract, if I'm not mistaken, says that we will start accepting those calls Monday, January 8th. Now, for those of you who've been here for a while, know that just because January 8th is the start date does not mean that we're going to have the information on every single site or that we're ready to schedule for every single site. So there'll be some stuff in the database by then, and other stuff that will start to roll in shortly thereafter. So stay tuned for information about that and some invites on that. So does anybody have any questions, concerns, anything?
I've got a question about the coordinated access. The form when the caller is calling back to check on the status.
Mm-hmm.
To fill the form out completely, again, I'm wondering, like, what is in the system that if the caller is calling back, what other information they would use to identify to pull them back up, other than their name, birth date, and social security number. And what I'm about to say, I don't mean to be facetious. I want to understand.
Mm-hmm.
So would they then say, oh, I don't have this person's name, but I do recall that they were transgender, male to female, and so there's a category where you look up all the transgender individuals. I mean, I guess I'm just trying to understand why the other information that isn't identifiable would be necessarily required, other than just name, date of birth, and social security number. Like, I don't know how that particular system works. Computer-wise, what is it, HMIS or what have you? So I don't know if that's something, how that would all come together.
Yeah. I am not familiar at all with HMIS, but this procedure was something that was come up between our coordinated access specialists and management. So, I mean, if there's a concern that you're consistently having people refuse to give you this information, then you might want to make note of it and send an email to 211 supervisor, and we can see if this is a pattern and see if there's reason to tweak the protocol. But for right now, just do the best you can to get all of the information. And if you have a caller who is refusing to provide any piece of this information, make note of it in your incomplete, when you save the incomplete. I would say it's probably more critical to it as far as social security number, that we at least get, if somebody's giving you a hard time about that, at the very least get the last 4 digits. That's what Sandra recommended earlier.
Obviously.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, we want to get as much information as we can from beginning to that point where it instructs us to stop. But specifically, if somebody's giving you a hard time about providing their social security number again, see at the very least if they will provide those last 4 digits for you, because that will be helpful. Okay. If you have anybody else that's refusing any bit of those questions that you're asking, note it in the incomplete. And if you do notice a consistent pattern that you're having quite a few clients refuse a certain piece of information, then pass that along to 211 supervisor, and they can take a look at that and decide if we need to make any sort of changes.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I'll be mindful of that. I'm also thinking of, time-wise too, because if the other information, those other categories like ethnicity, race, whatever, aren't necessarily searchable, and aren't going to add to being able to recontact the person, it will just kind of save time and keystrokes as well. But I'll definitely pay attention to the number of individuals who might be hesitant to provide, especially social security number again.
I'll make mention of it and just see what happens. But I'm not familiar really with HMIS, so I don't know how critical that is.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Anybody else have any questions? Okay. All right. Well, great. So thank you, everybody, for showing up and listening and paying attention. And I will talk to you all next time. Oh, and just a reminder, too, that generally we don't do webinars during tax season, so you're off the hook for a little while, excepting for our pre-tax season training, but that will be much more informal and in smaller groups. So I will talk to all of you again soon.